Hey everyone, this is Brian, and today I will be presenting my final, quality improvement project, which focuses on reducing my overall meat consumption by at least 15% during the calendar year of 2026. At first glance, this goal might sound simple or even personal rather than, some sort of like clinical trial. But the truth is that this project aligns with many of the same principles that we've kind of all studied throughout this course. Principles like data driven decision making, continuous improvements, and applying kind of a structural change to models to achieve sustainable outcomes. And my personal aim is to develop healthier habits, reduce my overall environmental impact, and create a long term improvement to my eating patterns using all of the same improvement tools that we use in healthcare settings. So let's get into actually kind of identifying this problem, which was the first step of this product or project. Through self-monitoring in 25, I noticed that I consume meat almost daily, far more than I'd like to, and this includes meals at home, meals eaten out, quick kind of like food choices driven by like convenience. Um, and this overexposure to meat isn't just a personal preference issue. The National Library of Medicine suggests that overindulgence of meat is associated with increased risk of diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, certain cancers. And the USDA estimates that roughly 105 million acres, or about like 36% of the USA, is dedicated to kind of raising this cattle farmland, while only 377 million acres, or about 16.7%, is used for human food crops. So that's your corn, your potatoes, your soybeans. Um, and I don't have enough time to kind of get into the more environmental impacts, and it's not really associated with my personal health related risks or my personal health kind of choices and goals. But it is important to recognize how much space farmland takes up when compared to just your standard crops. So it's important for me to kind of reduce the amount of meat, not just from a health standpoint, but just from an environmental impact standpoint as well. So let's get into some of the specifics of this. Using the SMART framework, I have created the following goal. For my specific, I will intentionally reduce the number of days I consume meat by increasing more plant-based meals or things of like that. For my measurable, I will track my daily meat consumption, and I'm aiming for a 15% reduction from my 2025 baseline. For achievable, I will begin with more small changes, maybe like one meat free day a week, and then we'll scale up to two, and then three, and then so on and so forth. Relevance, this supports my health, my personal values, and sustainability goals. And for kind of time, this project will be completed from January 1st of 2026, and then it will end in December 31st of 2026, or the beginning of 2027. And I plan to do some kind of like quarterly progress reviews, which I'll get into in a little bit. But this SMART goal kind of acts as my foundation for my entire improvement plan. And to kind of add on to kind of like my overall SMART goals, I kind of have some of my strategy listed out here. So first things first, my goal is to reduce my meat consumption by 15% year over year, and I plan to do that by reduce my eating out, since restaurant meals are almost kind of always meat centered to some degree. Or they're definitely going to offer more meat centered dishes when compared to more vegetarian oriented dishes. Um, Especially kind of in this area, we don't have a lot of options when it comes to non-meat based dishes and areas that kind of specialize in things like that. But another thing I can do to help is to cook more at home. And home cooking gives me greater control over the ingredients that I consume and ingest. And also kind of being more selective with my meals. I will choose specific days to avoid meat to start off. So I'll say every Monday, for instance, there's not going to be any meat consumed, and then that will eventually scale up to every Monday, and then every Wednesday, and then every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and stuff like that. And I plan to take advantage of all the vegetarian vegan options that I can, even though we don't have a lot within our area. Um, I believe that this strategy will offer me the best balance of simplicity, accessibility, and kind of my overall impact. It doesn't require any major lifestyle changes, but should directly reduce my meat consumption. For example, plant based substitutes, bean based meals for my protein, vegetable forward dishes are widely available and easy to implement. You just have to be very selective and you have to be very intentional about what you eat. But this approach eliminates kind of the all or nothing pressure that people often feel when they kind of change diets and should help me avoid relapse throughout the year. Before kind of designing these interventions, assessing kind of my personal readiness, similar to how organizations assess readiness for their quality projects. This project is fully within my control, and importantly, I kind of gain buy-in from my immediate family since we share most of our meals. Their involvement is pretty essential, kind of for the overall success of this goal. This project requires very few resources. It's just the groceries that we buy and the food that we happen to eat on a given day. And the biggest tools I need are more consistency in tracking and kind of access to the vegetarian alternatives. But these are all readily available. This kind of readiness to change step is what kind of prevents this project from failing before it begins. And I believe that with my family's support and their willingness to facilitate this kind of lifestyle, I think that this should not be all that difficult for me and for us in general. And now we're on to kind of like our measurement, which is really the heart of any quality improvement project. And I've structured my management plan kind of using 3 categories that we've already kind of discussed throughout this course, but I'll give a little bit more detail on now. So our outcome measure is or just plain and simple, we're just going to reduce our meat consumption year over year. So I've tracked all the days that I've eaten meat and kind of like animal-based products throughout the year of 2025. And so that means that I have a definite number to shoot for to reduce 15% for the year of 2026. Then we're going to move on to our process measure. This was just going to keep us on track. Every quarter, or every 3 months, I will review kind of the progress towards this 15% reduction. And if I'm on track, I'll continue. If I'm falling behind, I'll adjust kind of by adding more meat-free meals or trying new vegetarian type options. And then finally, we've got our balance measure. This is important because sudden dietary changes can create frustration and kind of like burnout. So I'll monitor whether these changes feel too restrictive or if I feel like I'm forcing myself to revise the strategy to something more sustainable, kind of similar to change fatigue in clinical settings. So I'm going to kind of do this more slow adoption strategy where I do, again, that 1 day a week. And then I also have to account for kind of the heavy months, which, like, for instance, this November, we have Thanksgiving. We're going to do turkey Thanksgiving just because it's, I guess, tradition. So that is a guaranteed day that I will eat meat. My birthday will probably go out and I'll probably eat some sort of meat. 4th of July, we'd like to barbecue. That's another day. Christmas is another day. Things like that, especially in the latter half of the year or the fourth quarter of the year. I've already noticed, even though that this year isn't done, that I've already started to consume more meat than I did in the spring and summer months, for instance. So I'll have to be mindful of that. I'll have to make sure that my more lean months are a lot easier or I'll substitute more of those meals in for those lean months and to kind of balance out the heavy months that I'm going to have at the latter half of the year. So now kind of moving on to our PDSA cycle. So to test changes before fully implementing them for my plan, I'm going to kind of choose one meal per week to replace with a vegetarian or alternative. And then my do, I'm going to implement that change for several weeks. My study is I'm going to review how easy it was, how satisfied I feel, whether or not it reduced my overall meat intake. And then my act, I'm going to scale that up, where I'm going to scale up whatever works, and then I'll revise down whatever didn't. This kind of iterative approach allows for continuous improvement rather than jumping into a drastic lifestyle overhaul. So starting small and through this PDSA cycle, that should kind of reinforce the flexibility of this project. And finally, just kind of celebrating success and any sort of sustainable change. So as with any project, the success of this will be determined based on the results I get. So if I meet the goal of reducing meat consumption by 15% or more, I can celebrate with a fully vegetarian homemade dinner, for instance, or I can come up with some other goal. I don't have a super definite idea of what I'll do. But more importantly, the goal is not just a 1 year of improvement, it's building habits that will last beyond 2026. By the end of the year, I hope to feel fully comfortable with a more balanced, less meat dependent diet. The project encourages kind of a long term adherence, similar to sustaining gains in healthcare quality projects. But yeah, in summary, this project uses a structured improvement model to address a personal behavior pattern in a meaningful and achievable way. By identifying this problem, setting my SMART goal, involving stakeholders, my parents, kind of testing various strategies, applying continuous monitoring. I believe I've created a pretty realistic plan for reducing my personal meat consumption for the year of 2026. This project demonstrates that quality improvement tools are not only effective in healthcare, they can guide positive change in our daily lives. And if successful, this project, I believe, will improve my health, lower my environmental impact, and support some long-term sustainable habits. And just real quick, I've got kind of my references right here. Those were the two sources I mentioned earlier. That's really all I have. So, yeah, thank you.